convener of this session. Obviously, it's really being run by Katie and Becky. But I will just say a couple of words of introduction. First of all, thanks for coming along. I hope there'll be something interesting and informative in the next half an hour or so for you. A little bit of context to the session. A couple of years ago in mathematics, we decided on the basis actually of student demand that the sort of optional projects that students had in the third year of their mathematics degree, which are 15 credit projects, could in fact offer up a few topics in kind of educational development in mathematics related to the higher education experience. And the initial reason for that was because there were a pair of students who came along to us and said, look, we're going into mathematics teaching, that's the future, you know, we'd like to actually investigate something about the teaching of mathematics in higher education. So the topic they took up, and that was last year, was in fact the transition from school to university in mathematics, the changes, the experiences of the students and those kinds of things. And it was a traditional kind of project, and they started doing background research on that, they started talking to students, and then it became obvious about a quarter of the way into that actually that overlaps very much with the notion of agents of change. So there were two dimensions to the project really, the academic dimension, the normal sorts of learning criteria, etc., associated with mathematics projects. But on the other side, there was also the question of using that research in the context of students as agents of change. So they presented a project within that context last year. This year, we decided to carry on doing the same thing and offered a small number of topics to students in the same sorts of areas. And this year, Katie and Becky came along and they wanted to look at the use of technology within higher education in teaching of mathematics. So that's really what this session is about. But I think there are two dimensions to it, really, in a more generic sense. One is, to what extent can you reconcile the requirements and the demands and the learning objectives of an academic project, a sort of typical academic final year project, with the notion of change agents? And so there are a bunch of questions which we quite like you, probably in two groups or maybe three groups, to have a think about during this talk. And there are really 6 questions, 3 of them to do with technology in learning in general, and 3 of them to do with that last question about to what extent can you actually mix and match in an assessed project in this sort of way. So I'll hand around these questions. There's just 2 on, well actually there's 4 on one side and 3 on the other. And you can think about them as Katie and Becky go along and tell you something about what they discovered in their project and about that sort of balance. So I'll hand it over to Katie and Becky now.
So I'm Becky and this is Katie, and we've been working on our project over the past 2 terms. The area we've been researching is how the use of technology can enhance the learning and teaching of mathematics. And from our various pieces of research, we found a quote from a first-year student, which we felt explained the reason why we consider our project to be an important and current issue. I think technology is useful in my degree, as it is something which is vital in most things we do, so for our degrees to be relevant, they must include this. So we've been considering a number of different issues concerned with the combination of teaching and technology. The 3 we feel was most relevant was how can technology enhance the learning of maths, and how can technology be used effectively to teach mathematics? And finally, do the current methods of teaching apply to every learning type? There are considered to be 3 main learning types: visual, auditory and kinesthetic. Visual learners learn by watching the lecturer's body language and facial expressions, and often write their own detailed notes. Auditory learners will learn via verbal lectures, and written notes will have little meaning until they're heard aloud. Kinesthetic learners learn by doing, moving and touching, and they can often become restless during long periods of time.
So we began our project by looking into how mathematics teaching is currently structured, and we found that there's 2 main ways that lectures were taught, and that was through the chalk and talk method, which is seen as a more traditional method to teach maths, and also through PowerPoint presentations. We found that students really like the chalk and talk method as it's got a good pace for them to be able to keep up, be able to understand what's happening in the lecture. However, they do feel that sometimes this doesn't fully engage them into the lectures. They can switch off really quickly and doesn't really don't find it that interesting sometimes. When it comes to PowerPoint presentations, mathematics students are really against these, as they find it rushes through materials and doesn't give them an opportunity to actually take in anything they're listening to. So we looked into a lot of different technologies that could actually be used to enhance lectures, tutorials and self-learning. And here's just a few of the ones we looked into, and today we're just going to talk to you about students' opinions on these technologies, mathematics lecturers' opinions, and also we spoke to business school lecturers who'd actually had experience using these technologies, so we can also discuss with you what they've actually found from using these technologies.
Firstly, we're going to talk about clickers, and these are an interactive voting system, and they've been used in business schools quite successfully over the past couple of years. Speaking to maths students, we found that they like the fact that they can remain anonymous when they're answering questions, and they also like the idea of getting instant feedback, so they know immediately whether they got answers right or wrong. Maths lecturers were concerned with the time it would take to produce these slides, and also to put mathematical notations onto the questions. You can see on this slide, which is a clicker question which we use in one of our experiments, it is possible to put mathematical notation and also images as well. Business school lecturers said that students generally respond really well to this technology, and they are really useful for the lecturer to understand where there are gaps in knowledge for the students.
Echo 360 is the technology currently used at the university to record lectures, and it's something which is used a lot in the business school for a lot of their modules. It's something which, when we spoke to students, they really wanted to come into mathematics lectures because they think it would be a great aid for revision, as well as to recap on the lectures they hadn't fully understood. When we spoke to mathematics lecturers about this, they were worried that attendance might lower because of recorded lectures, but speaking to business school lecturers who'd experienced recording lectures, they don't think this is actually an issue. And also from speaking to students about lowering attendance, they do think this obviously would affect attendance a little bit, but suggested that the recordings from the lectures would actually be put online just before revision period, so they'd be used at the end of the term rather than throughout the term, just to combat any lowering of attendance. Another thing is when you use the recorded lectures, it sometimes doesn't grasp what's on the board completely, so that's particularly important in mathematics lectures, but students believe that they'd actually use the recordings to listen to the audio and to hear the explanations and see the explanations again, so then they'd want to go to the lectures as well to get the written notes, but use the recordings for the audio. This is just a snapshot for you here of clickers and recorded lectures being used at the same time. And as you can see on the side, you can flip to the part of the lecture that you're interested in, and also another example of a mathematical notation being used in clickers.
Moving on to videos and podcasts. As maths students, me and Katie have both used YouTube videos quite often to help us with different issues that we've come across when we can't go and see the lecturer, or if it's just a quick 10-minute video that we need to watch. Speaking to other maths students, they have said also that they use this quite a lot, especially during the first year. So, has anyone seen these videos before? Yeah? So we'll just show you a quick example.
Notation and things like that, you can use all that, but I'm going to do it, I mean it's equivalent, I'm going to do it without it though. So what you do is you form a new function that depends on x, y, z and the symbol lambda, and to get that new function you just take whatever you're trying to maximize or minimize and you subtract away the original constraint, you set it equal to 0 though, and then you also multiply that by lambda, so that's how you come up with this new function. And then you basically, this new function, you take partial
So most of the videos he will do the writing, so you'll never see his face. So like in normal lectures you wouldn't, and students actually find that this is perfectly fine. I think a lot of lecturers think that students need to see the lecturer doing the maths, but actually maths students have expressed that that's not necessary. There's a guy called Salman Khan who's produced a vast bank of online resources. They range over many different subjects, but mostly with maths videos. The reason why he started making these videos was to teach his younger cousins maths, and he decided to put the videos on YouTube. And he actually found, quite interestingly, that his cousins preferred him on YouTube than they did in person. And he put this down to the fact that they were able to pause and play him, and also it saved them the embarrassment of having to ask him to repeat explanations. Maths students have agreed with this, and they also like the fact that they could use them for recapping just small sections and a lot for revision as well. Again, maths lecturers were concerned with the time it would take to produce these, and also whether using the technology would be quite difficult. So to prove that it's not that difficult, we produced a couple of these, some in the style of the YouTube videos, and also one with a flip camera, with the lecturer being seen. So I'll just pass around the little flip camera. Really easy to use, and it's quite a cheap piece of equipment as well. Shall we just play that? So this is Stuart Townley, and we've been working on a project with him as well.
Briefly about diagonalizing the matrix. So first, just a recap. So we need to remind ourselves eigenvalues. Okay, so take A, it's an n-line matrix. The eigenvalues of A are the zeros in its characteristic polynomial.
So for these videos, we're not suggesting that they're recorded on huge sections of the course, just really short 10-minute snippets of a little section that maybe students have expressed a problem with more than one student, and it would be time-consuming to make, but it would eventually save you time because you'd only have to make one explanation rather than repeating it to many different students separately.
And as we said, there are different ways to do these. We also did some in the style of the YouTube videos where it was looking down on the paper. So there is the technology already available in the university for these to be made. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about something called Captivate, and this is a screen capturing tool, and it's something which is used by a lecturer in a business school, and he says it's really successful. And I'll just show you an example of it just because it's easier than explaining. So as you can see, every movement of the mouse has been recorded, and a little explanation has been written on why that's been done. And you can also have a audio voice over the top of this to explain what you're doing. We think these will be really, really useful for introducing students to new computer programs when they come to university, such as MATLAB and R, because when we've spoken to students, they said that they feel like they've been thrown into the deep end with these programs and haven't actually got given much introductory to them, so they find that they really seem to struggle with these. The business school actually uses this as it's a very powerful teaching tool, and yeah, we found that a lot of students would really, really find this very beneficial in the mathematics department, for, as I said, when it comes to the new statistical programs they're introduced to in first year.
Moving on to online testing, this is another technology that's been used successfully in the business school, both for self-assessment for students and also for graded assessments. We're speaking to students in the maths school, they said that they've used this a lot for recapping things and mainly for their own self-learning. They did strongly express that they didn't want to have these for assessments, they purely wanted them there to use whenever they wanted and at times when it suited them. The other thing that they did say was that they wanted to have instant feedback, so they wanted to know which questions they got right or wrong, and also have worked solutions so they could understand where they went wrong and where there are gaps in their knowledge. And maths lecturers actually suggested it would be quite useful to have at the beginning of modules to test students on their previously assumed knowledge.
Interactive whiteboards are something which has been hugely invested in schools recently. Students like the fact that you can move easily between screens, show images and videos, and also that the exact notes that are written on the interactive whiteboard can then be posted on Ellie. The small size of interactive whiteboards does mean they would only be able to use in small groups or as small lecture theatres, not obviously the large ones that we have here. Students who we spoke to said that when they came into the first year, they actually expected there to be interactive whiteboards at university because it's just what they were used to at school. They did a lot of their work on these at school. However, we asked the question, are there cheaper alternatives to these that have the same benefits? We actually used interactive whiteboards as part of one of our experiments, and we think that they are very complex to use without the right training and without being used to them. We did have quite a lot of difficulty, quite temperamental, and they are very technical, so I think they would have to have a lot of training for them to work properly for the people who are using them. But we also think that tablets, which are actually used in the mathematics school at the moment, are actually alternatives to interactive whiteboards that are just as successful.
So mobile phones phones. Now you might think that's a slightly odd technology to be able to be used within the maths department. However, we have found that there are benefits from it. It allows students to ask open questions anonymously, so unlike clicker questions where the lecturer will direct questions, the students will be able to tell the lecturer what issues they're having. We do feel that lecturers need to be really vigilant with the questions that are being sent into them and allowing extra time to explain these problems either in lectures or perhaps producing extra resources like a podcast. And considering future students who will be coming up in years to come, they'll be used to doing absolutely everything on their mobile phones. So do you think, should we start incorporating that into our degree teaching now?
Online forums are a place where students can discuss their problems with students and also with lecturers. They can also notify lecturers what they do and don't understand, and it can be a way for them to interact with lecturers, asking them what they want to go over in tutorials. We think the most important thing about online forums is the fact that students can communicate with other students, as when it comes to mathematics, it's really useful to work together and listen to other people's ideas and other people's explanations. Prezi is an online presentation tool, and it's actually what we're using to give you our presentation today. We think it's a much more interactive and engaging alternative to a PowerPoint presentation, and you can use it really well in group work, as people can edit your Prezi, so you can each add to the Prezi, edit each other's work. So it's a great working tool in group work. We actually used this presentation programme when we ran a sample lecture a few months ago, and we had really good feedback from both lecturers and students about Prezi. In particular, they just think it's a more engaging and alternative option than PowerPoint presentations. So we're now going to look at some of the recommendations that we feel we would like to see in the mathematics department from our research. So if we were asked to implement our findings into the mathematics department at Exeter, we would make the following changes within lectures, tutorials and self-learning. So firstly, lectures. One of the most important things we found about lectures is students really like the pace of talk and chalk. So this is something we think we obviously don't want to change. However, we think that using turning point technology with the clickers and also recorded lectures will both enhance the engagement between students and lecturers in lectures, and also the recorded lectures will be a great tool for revision and for recap. When speaking to lecturers, obviously they were quite worried that this would be more time consuming for them. However, we're not suggesting that lecturers completely change their format of their lecturing. We're not suggesting that technology is used in every lecture, in every module, in every way. It's more to aid the learning of students in lectures, just adding the clickers at the end and recorded lectures.
So tutorials. Now what we found in tutorials is actually technology isn't really essential, but we did find in our sample tutorial that we ran is that students' interaction with us, because we led the tutorial, was hugely increased. There was a lot more participation, and students, as a result, were far more motivated during the tutorials. So from the sample tutorial, we found that students wanted to have more interaction, and they also wanted to have more student participation, surprisingly. They did say that this participation didn't necessarily have to be speaking up in class. It could be anonymous using mobile phones or clickers. Therefore, we would implement the use of tablets. So all tutorial notes that the lecturer is writing could be uploaded onto LEs, and students could concentrate on the explanations being said rather than concentrating on writing down all the notes. Clickers, again, to increase the participation, and also the interaction between students and lecturers, which we feel isn't hugely advanced within the maths school at the moment. And finally, Prezi, just within group work. Not a lot of changes, but we really feel they'd be effective to make tutorials into the way that students want. Moving on to self-learning. Now this is the area where we feel technology could definitely be used to make the biggest changes. Ellie at the moment is mainly only used to upload exercise sheets and at times lecture notes, but why aren't we maximising the use of Ellie? Students actually felt that they wanted to have more resources, and they felt that Ellie wasn't being used to its full extent. So we've asked lecturers to produce online lecture notes, some online tests throughout the term, podcasts, and for those running computer-based modules, we've asked them to make some captivate videos. To increase interaction, we've used online forums so that students could direct what they wanted to be going over in lectures and tutorials, and also what the lecturers what they wanted to see in podcasts and Captivate videos. Again, lecture recordings on LE, just so students were able to listen to the explanations again. And initially, yes, these would take time to make. However, in the long run, they'd be relevant for many years to come, and lecturers only need to make small additions or alterations.
So in conclusion, so these are 3 questions that we've concentrated on. How can technology affect the learning of mathematics? How can technology be used effectively to teach mathematics? And do these methods of teaching apply to every learning type? So technology used in the mathematics department really depends on the learning environment. As we said previously, what works in a tutorial might not work in a lecture, and some technology will be more useful for self-learning than for group learning. Interaction and motivation increase when technology is used in all learning environments. This is particularly true for lectures and tutorials. It really engages students and makes them interact more, and also improves their motivation.
We really feel that technology could definitely enhance the communication between students and lecturers. It would enable lecturers to find out where students had gaps in their knowledge and therefore make extra resources based on that. And also students would be able to find out where they have a lack of understanding and then use those resources to help them. So overall, if different technology was incorporated into different learning environments, we definitely feel within lectures and tutorials that they could be adapted to suit a more varied range of learning styles. And finally, speaking to many maths students, we found that actually the explanation of maths was the most important part of their learning. So being able to listen to the recorded lectures again would really, really help them. And we also think that their learning would be more in depth because they'd actually think about the reasoning of the maths rather than just learning the steps. Thank you very much for listening. And do you have any questions?